Hey, good afternoon. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. Today, I'm really thrilled and pleased to have with me as my guest Michael Plimack, who's a partner at Covington. Michael, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Richard.
So, Michael, before we dive into the two topics I want to cover with you, tell me about that interesting painting that you're sitting in front of.
Absolutely. And yeah, that is not a virtual background. That's an actual painting. It was painted by my wife, so I got a really good price on it. Uh, she was very fortunate to have this as one of her two paintings in the De Young Open in 2020, which is
Oh,
you may know, but the De Young Museum in San Francisco during the pandemic had an art show to support local artists. You had to be in the Bay Area to apply. It was a jury show, completely based on the art, photograph the art. She had two paintings selected. This was one of them. She was also fortunate to have another painting in the 2023 show, which just closed on January 7th. So
wow.
try to give her a shout out by sitting in front of her painting.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you can use that as a virtual Zoom for other locations. It works
This is
perfect. So, Michael, I've interviewed, probably over 250 guests, and and you happen to have two things. Usually, I look for one thing that's interesting. I saw that you were a competitive rower, and I had Daniel James Brown, I guess, a guest many years ago, who of course wrote Boys in the Boat. And then also you do meditation, which is a topic that I'm interested in. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
great. I'm very happy to talk about both of those things or other things as well.
Fantastic. Well, let's start with rowing. That's not a sport that a lot of people get into. How did you get into rowing? When did you start rowing? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I was what they call a walk-on, which meant I had no prior rowing experience before college. I think that still exists in collegiate rowing, although it's probably
Hmm.
less prevalent than it was then. Um, and so like the characters in the Boys in the Boat who, were just sort of working class people who showed up and learned to row. I was from a working class background, no organized sport experience, but I'm 6'4" and a half. And
Hmm.
so I had decided to try it before I got to college, but in my school, the coach stood at the registration line, the freshman registration line, where all freshmen had to register and pick the tall guys out of the line. So I got picked out of the line. Would you like to try rowing? And I said yes. So I went down
Huh.
to the house, and so I rowed at Brown for 4 years, and it was just a huge part of my college life.
Interesting. So you did not row in high school.
No, I grew up in Coney Island in Brooklyn. There wasn't, as far as I know, any rowing
Huh.
anywhere near where I grew up.
Huh. Huh.
Uh, so yeah, I mean, rowing is, I mean, there's obviously a fair amount of skill involved, but it's not as skill intensive as say basketball or
Yeah.
baseball. I
Huh.
mean, you're not going to
Huh.
show up as a walk-on most likely
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
play at a top college basketball program. But rowing, you can learn the technique, and then the rest is,
Practice.
conditioning, training, mental toughness, etc.
Now, my daughter actually did rowing, so I have a little familiar with it. But what is the attraction to that sport? I mean, what do you like about it?
Yeah, and it's definitely not for everybody. So
Yeah.
it's really perfect for people who like to train a lot, just really love athletic
Mm.
training. It's also for people who, for whatever reason of, genes and environment, like to push themselves as hard as they can. I mean, you're sort of
Mm.
testing your endurance on a daily basis. You're testing your limits. You're trying to work towards pushing yourself through your limits.
Mm.
So, and then it is a tremendous team sport. You can't, unlike say basketball, which, I'm a big Warriors fan, you can't have a star who can run away. You can't have a Steph
Mhm.
Curry in a boat of 8 people pulling oars. You really all have to contribute. Um, so all those things really appeal to me.
Mm.
Uh, and, I just kind of fell into it.
Yeah, interesting. It's also a sport of like increments, right? Where you're talking about incremental improvements, right? Timing and synchronization. I mean, that's my sense. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. I mean, a race over 2,000 meters, which is a standard length, I mean, a victory a margin of 3 seconds would be
Yeah,
pretty
yeah, yeah,
considerable.
yeah.
So yeah, you're really, and a lot of the training is on rowing machines that measures exactly what your output is over
Yeah,
time. So you become very familiar with your limits, and you know you're really working on pushing beyond those limits as much as you can, which becomes very challenging. And that was in a way, sort of my early meditative practice. I didn't know it at the time, but it was sort of a form of meditation. And that's really the challenge is just pushing yourself through. We had a very competitive rowing program. I was not one of my senior year, our varsity boat won, essentially was the national championship. I was not in that boat, but I rowed with a lot of guys who went to the Olympics and were national team members. And I remember one guy going off to the national team and just said, we're all going to be very talented, but it's really just going to come down to who wants it the most
Yeah,
and who
yeah,
wants
interesting.
the most. So.
Huh. Well, is endurance training something you knew you would like, or did you like it after you started rowing? Like, at what point did you even think you would like the sport?
I mean, there was something about, I couldn't even put my finger on it, but there was something about rowing that captured my attention as I was graduating from high school.
Huh.
It's hard to articulate.
Yeah.
I had been a person who I had started running in high school, just in an indoor track at my high school in Brooklyn, which 20 laps made a mile. So, it wasn't, even that wasn't for everybody. I had taken a number of bicycle trips where I was camping, and the summer after I graduated from college at Brown, I led a 30-day trip of 10 kids with American youth hostels, which was it was probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. So I had done a number of things where I challenged myself, both physically and mentally.
Huh.
And this was just sort of the next step for me.
Yeah,
And
interesting.
it gave a tremendous structure to my college experience. It's just something that I did, for a few hours a day. It physically removed me from campus, which was great. Getting in a boat and going far up the Seekonk River. It was just a great way to get away from the campus life.
Well, seeing my daughter, as I said, who trained for maybe a year and a half, maybe 2 years, and she'd be rowing, before the sunrise, which I'm sure you were doing as well. I mean, I'm thinking, wow, you must really want to do this if you're willing to get out of bed and be on the rowing before the sun rises. I mean, is that is
Well,
that your experience?
one of the secrets though was we were one of the few collegiate programs where we rode in the afternoon, not in the morning, which
Okay.
is very important. So I rode in the afternoon, so I didn't have to get up early. However, we did have supplemental training 3 days a week. We had to sprint up and down hills, and you never want to do that before practice because you didn't want to be tired for practice. So we would do the supplemental training at 11 p.m. or midnight. So
Wow.
sprinting up hills at midnight in New England winter, um, probably not also not for everybody, but I didn't have to get up early in the morning. I often wonder whether I would have done the sport. I'm not a big morning person,
Oh,
so
I see. Interesting.
it's really important to me.
So if you did that for 4 years in college, do you feel like you missed out on a lot of other social activities and partying and what your other friends did, when there was downtime? Because I'm guessing you either were studying or rowing.
Yeah, that is pretty much what I did in college, one or the other.
Yeah.
And then we weren't allowed to drink alcohol for most of the spring semester. We had what was called training rules. So for about
Oh.
half of my college career, I didn't have alcohol. Um, it's interesting though. I did go to parties sober in the spring semester, and I kind of learned that uh, they were really no more fun, you know, not sober than sober. So I actually, and I've been doing a dry January for I don't know over 15 years.
Yeah.
Ends today, and I just the sobriety part was actually kind of not as hard as you might think.
Huh,
But
huh.
I just tend to be sort of a disciplined person, particularly at that age.
I
And
see.
so, as I tell people, it may sound admirable, but to me, it just kind of came very naturally. And
Interesting.
just, it wasn't that hard in a sense to do.
I get the feeling, or I get the sense that rowing has a lot of similarities to just swimming also. Is the swimming a sport that you do? And is that the case?
I am a terrible swimmer. My wife, my then girlfriend, who we started dating in Berkeley exactly 40 years ago. She was an undergrad at Cal, and I was at Berkeley Law School. She essentially taught me to swim in the Hearst pool, and it is very similar. I think swimming is probably one of the few sports that's even more boring to do than rowing, where you're just face down, looking at the bottom of the pool. Uh, so I never became a good enough swimmer, but I did swim a mile, in law
Okay.
school. It took a long time because I was such a slow swimmer. So there is a lot of similarity. very, and actually moving water, there's a good crossover. My wife, who was a competitive swimmer as a kid, gets on the rowing machine and has absolutely perfect technique. Never rowed a day in her life, never had any coaching, but that process of moving water is very
Mm.
similar.
Yeah,
So
interesting.
yeah, they're definitely sports that require a high degree of tolerance for repetition.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and that's just something I've always sort of been able to handle.
That's interesting. And when you're rowing, right, you're not listening to music or anything like that, right? So it's not like, mostly when they do repetition sport, they're listening to music or iPod. Or I assume that you don't do that when you're rowing.
Not out in the water. I mean, in training, indoor training, which is a lot of it, yeah, definitely music on the rowing machine, the ergometer,
I see.
with training. So yeah, but on the water, no, you're very dialed in. You're listening to your coxswain,
Oh,
you
right.
stroke rate, strategy, so forth.
Yeah, yeah. Have you seen the movie Boys in the Boat? You read the
I
book, I'm
have.
assuming. Have you seen the movie?
I've read the book, I've seen the movie, and I have a story. So my connection to that is that my first varsity coach, who I had my sophomore year, graduated from the University of Washington in 1940. So the Boys in the Boat was the
Yeah.
crew, University of Washington crew, 1936, and the Olympic team. So he and those guys were junior rowers. So
Oh,
my
interesting.
coach overlapped and rowed at University of Washington at the same time as the Boys in the Boat. And so we jump ahead to when I rowed with him, which was 1980 and 81. It was his
Yeah.
last year, so 40 years after he graduated. And so much of, and the book describes the training in more detail than the movie, but the movie kind of captures the visual and the feel of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So much of what's captured in the movie was my experience rowing with this coach who was in that
Interesting.
program. And in fact, the equipment itself, the George that they mentioned in the movie is George Pocock, who's legendary, boat maker of the 20th century.
Oh, that's so
I
cool.
rode in a Pocock my freshman year, wood oars, wood boat. It looked exactly like the boat in the movie. So it was
Wow.
really gratifying to see that. And
Oh,
I felt like
interesting.
I'm kind of like the last of that line because my coach coached me, and then we got a new coach after that. And
With
you know,
no connect. Oh, interesting.
so
Is your coach still alive? Did he read the book? Did he see the movie?
I believe he's passed away. A guy named Vic
Oh,
Michelson who went by
okay.
Mike. Yeah, I mean he
Oh,
was probably in his 60s in the 40 years ago.
yeah,
So he
yeah, yeah.
passed away.
Oh, interesting. Well, that's really cool. Well, moving on to the next topic, which
Yes.
is meditation, topic you also know something about. I've done quite a bit of meditation, I would say, although I'm definitely a novice. Tell me a little bit about how you got into it. I mean, did it come from, you kind of mentioned it with the rowing. Is that kind of where it started, or did it come later?
I mean, in hindsight, I think I realized it started there, but really where it started was, I would say, kind of classic midlife crisis type scenario. I started meditating right around the time that I turned 50, and
Mm.
I was seeing a psychiatrist because I have sleep problems. I have and still have to some extent, although not as much, but and maybe anxiety issues. And so, this is the guy who was seeing me was a committed meditator and said
Mm.
to me, you really should do this. This would be very helpful for someone
Mm.
with you with
Mm.
the sleep issues and so forth, and really pushed me over a long time, and I resisted. But then I finally went to a place called Spirit Rock Meditation Center, which
Yep.
is in Kern
Heard of
County.
them. Yep.
They've had a program on Monday nights for over 30 years. And where you sit in a group and you meditate, and then there's a talk. And I went for the first time, and I walked out of the meditation hall, and I said, "That's it, I'm in. I'm doing it."
Interesting.
And that was 12 years ago, and I've been meditating ever since. And I've done 7 or 8 silent meditation retreats at Spirit Rock. I've
Oh,
spoken meditation practices. I'm Covington's self-appointed meditation guru, and I lead a weekly meditation group in the San Francisco office, and I've done a bunch
oh.
of stuff. So yeah, it's just been a huge part of my midlife, 50 plus part of my life.
Yeah, interesting. It's interesting. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people who do meditation. It's interesting that you got it so quickly, or maybe not that quickly, but usually it takes a long time because at first it's so foreign and it's very frustrating because you can't get your mind to stop thinking and chattering and talking and it's hard to kind of detach yourself from that.
Well, so this is where the rowing piece comes in. So what I really liked about meditation practice from the beginning was that it was repetitive. It
Mm,
was something you did every day. it's essentially practicing to change how your mind processes. It's training
Yeah.
the mind, which is very analogous to training the body, particularly as in the early stages of meditation. So I really latched onto the fact that it was a daily practice.
Mm.
I liked the intensity of it. I liked how, you sit and you struggle with keeping your mind calm,
Yeah.
non-reactive, you
Yeah.
know, non-judgmental. And it is very difficult, particularly when you start. But that was just a challenge to me. And there were plenty of sessions where I was, completely frustrated and, I'm not getting anywhere in the early days. But the rowing part of me said this, it takes years to build up these kinds of skills and, just keep sticking with it. So the first piece of advice I give people who are starting meditation practice is start small, just a few minutes a day,
Yeah.
something that's not too much that it will cause you to stop. Because the best
Yeah.
meditation advice is don't stop, keep
Yeah.
doing it. Whatever
Yeah.
practice you're doing, keep doing it. And so that part I had maybe more of an advantage to others because I had done this sport that's so sort of regimented and repetitive.
Who are some of your favorite meditation instructors? I know there's a lot of famous ones out there. Joseph Goldstein, Sam Harris has a great meditation app. Or do you use an app? What do you use for your tool?
Yeah, so I do. So I use Insight Timer. We just through our program at work, I've started using Calm also because it's included in the benefits. And um, I've used it primarily just as a timer, but there are obviously a lot of good guided meditations. And that's another thing I encourage people get an app for a variety of reasons. But I mean, the crew that works at Spirit Rock are sort of uniformly great. Jack
Mm.
Kornfield, of course, is one of the big founders there. And, I've worked with Mark Coleman, who's a great teacher. I mean, there are just so many in the Bay Area. We're so fortunate to have so many. Um, so I highly recommend Spirit Rock Meditation Center, their website. There's a lot of resources.
Yeah.
Doing it in person with people now is a great thing to be able to do.
Well, now that you've done meditation for, you say over a decade, describe to me kind of where you're at in terms of this progression. 'Cause one of the things on meditation is that what is it? What do they say? It's easy to learn, but very hard to master, or whatever. It's kind
Yeah.
of give me a feeling for kind of what stage are you at in your journey? Because I'm sure you're continuously improving.
So I would say, and to your point, I think I'm a beginner. You're always sort of always a beginner, and you're supposed to bring what's called beginner's mind to it. So you approach it each time as if you're a beginner, and not thinking that you've mastered something, but you're ready to learn anew. Um, I think the basic idea of meditation is, as I say to people, it's about being aware of our moment-to-moment experiences in a sort of awake, non-judgmental way. And
Mm.
so, and in another way to express it would be it's sort of a combination of relaxation and concentration. So you're maintaining a relaxed physical and mental state while you focus on your moment to moment experiences and you're sort of watching the movie that is your moment to moment experiences while being non-judgmental about it.
Yeah.
And so there's so many great things that are happening for your brain in that interaction. And one of them is the sort of non-reactivity, equanimity, the ability to have something set you off center or off balance, but then return to balance as quickly and easily as possible. And so this process of meditating, trying to be aware what's happening, the mind gets distracted, you start thinking about the email you're going to send, what have you, and then you bring your mind back and you try to do it in a way that you're not criticizing yourself, you're just being aware of the process.
Yeah.
That spending hundreds of hours doing that prepares us to bring that out off the cushion, as they say, into other situations. So for example, I tell people, maybe used to be you get cut off in traffic by somebody and you'd be pissed off for an hour. Well, now after meditating, you're pissed off for 5 minutes. Like that's
Mhm.
a big win,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
in practicing of law, opposing counsel's a jerk, the judge is yelling at you, what have you. And to be able to, I mean, your blood pressure is obviously going to rise and you're going to get that adrenaline, but then to have it all settle down more quickly and bring yourself back to a place that you want to be. That's I think some of the brain training that goes through the meditation process that carries through to our life that's so helpful.
What is your meditation regimen like? What do you try to do? Do it every day? How long do you do it for? Where do you like to do it typically? Tell me about that.
Sure. So, in the early years, as I said, I was fanatical. I mean, I was, it didn't matter if I was in trial, on a plane, whatever. I meditated every single day for years.
Mm,
Now it's more, maybe 3 to 4 times a week.
mm,
Um, and I have the weekly meditation session, as I said, but then, I'll do it downstairs in my office. It really, there's sort of a conventional wisdom of do it at the same time in the same place, have sort of a special place to do it. Um, do it at a time. I'm sufficiently familiar with it that I can kind of do it wherever it's convenient. It's usually 20 minutes, sometimes 30 minutes. If
hmm
if I'm really jammed up, maybe 15 minutes, but typically 20 to 30 minutes. And I sit in silence, as motionless as possible. I sit in a chair, upright back, unsupported. I can't sit on a cushion on the floor. I'm too stiff. Uh, and, I just kind of try to get in that zone of being aware of what's happening, being relaxed. Thoughts kind of wander in, wander out, but stay focused. I do mix in guided meditation sometimes.
hmm
That's very helpful. But that's the basic meditation practice that I do.
Is it growing in popularity at your firm? More and more people coming to your class, or is it just a few handful of people that are doing it? What is
It's a
the?
handful. It's modest. There are ups and downs. I've had during the pandemic, ironically, maybe because we were also in need of help. I did some Zoom ones where we got 80, 90 people
Oh,
and across
wow.
the firm in the U.S., all U.S. offices. Um, my weekly session is more like a half a dozen
Oh, that's pretty
people.
good.
It's still pretty good, and it cuts across attorneys, staff, which is nice. So I'm not sure I could say it's growing right now,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
we have a core group that's interested, which is good.
Do you study with anybody on a regular basis, or have you studied with people? I mean, I know you mentioned the Spirit Rock thing, but is there, are meditation teachers that you work with or anything like that? Tell me about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, so I mean, in the early years, I read a lot of books, and there are different types of meditation practice, and I always say, you know, it's not one size fits all. As
Yeah.
long as you have certain kind of core values, they all work. But the meditation tradition that I've kind of fallen into, Spirit Rock, which is the sort of the meditation practices of Southeast Asia, the Theravadan branch of Buddhism. So I read a lot of books about that. By the
That's
way,
isn't that the Vipassana? Is that the
yes,
Vipassana? Yeah, yeah,
Vipassana.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
Vipassana. Um, I did work, I mentioned Mark Coleman. I worked one-on-one with him for a while, several years ago, and he's great.
Mm,
Um, I've talked to a bunch here and there. So I have done less formal
mm,
stuff recently, but
mm,
my wife, who also is a very big mindfulness person, will, throw on some YouTube
mm.
video at some point and watch
Yeah,
something.
yeah,
So it's
yeah,
it's
yeah.
always I think that the pace of learning has maybe slowed down, perhaps in retirement, and have a little more time. I'll jump
Yeah,
with
yeah,
both
yeah.
feet again and have a second phase.
One of the things that I found somewhat helpful, because I've also sort of lost practice, which I probably should get back. This conversation is good because it's getting my mind thinking. But one of the things I do try to do is sort of what I would call sort of the micro meditation during the day, where I recognize that my mind is just going off into some sort of, deep space or just going crazy. And I can just pull myself back, recognizing that these are just thoughts in my head. There's nothing happening. And I'll just touch something physically or just try to bring some physical sensations just to draw me back into the moment. And that helps kind of just bring my mind back under control. Because every one of us, we all get that, the runaway train, the runaway mind, and it's like all of a sudden you just feel so out of control. And at least you kind of recognize that now.
Absolutely. That's a great point. I mean, it's not, you don't have to just sit 20 or 30 minutes a day. And I tell people this when we talk about it, having little bits of mindfulness throughout the day really
Yeah.
does wonders. And it's
Yeah.
great to have things that you do, like riding up and down an elevator, going out to check the mail, these
Yeah.
things that are just sort of, routine things that maybe your mind's just thinking about some random stuff. to kind of turn those into mindfulness practices where you're engaged with the physical act of walking to the mailbox and opening it up, and how does the mail feel in your hand? And now
Yeah.
I'm turning around and going back to that. And if you can intersperse those through the day, it does a wonderful job of just breaking up the flood of mental activity that we have. Or as
Yeah.
you said, when something really hits and it's big, to just take stock and say, I can get a little distance from this right now.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can be in my chair and see how I feel and be aware of my breath and just look at my nervous system. It's all out on fire, but watching it now, it's starting to settle down, and just see the changes in your state.
Yeah.
It's great stuff.
Just going back to your rowing days, do you do anything on a daily basis, or a physical thing? Like, do you run now or anything like that? Do you do some sort of form of exercise every day that kind of mimics, obviously not rowing, but that kind of mimics that experience?
Well, I have an erg. I have a rowing machine in the
Oh,
house.
uh-huh.
Use that all the time, along with other stuff. I've been fortunate to be very physically active over the last 45 years. So I'm about to turn 62, so I am seeing some changes in my output that are interesting, shall we say. But yeah, no, I still train a lot. Not nearly as much as I used to,
Yeah.
but yeah, I do. I still do a lot of rowing on a rowing machine. I haven't rowed on the water in a long time, and I don't think I'm going to probably do that anytime soon. But yes, and I'm very fortunate. I work in Salesforce Tower. Our offices are on a high floor, and I usually about once a week I run up the stairs of Salesforce Tower, usually twice. Take the elevator down and run up again. Recently, just once, but I'm working back up to twice.
Yeah, that's very cool. Well, Michael, I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank goodness you put this in your profile. When I saw it, I was like, I definitely want to talk to Michael about these two topics. I had a lot of fun and really appreciate your taking the time.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
This is Richard Hsu and Michael Plimack. Thanks.